Anyone who has experienced childhood trauma, especially the type that comes from abuse, understands that the core trauma that they deal with as adults is abandonment trauma. And that's what we will be talking about in this video. In my 25 years of working with clients who have experienced trauma and abuse as children, there is a common issue that always needs to be worked through, and that is abandonment trauma. Abandonment trauma may be talked about as chronic loneliness and abandonment issues. It's a source of extreme emotional pain for many and at the core of so many relationship issues. It leaves many feeling ashamed, helpless, and misunderstood, and the lack of understanding many times comes from the individual themselves. In the moment they are experiencing the pain, they may feel crazy or out of control. For this reason, I wanted to create this video so that individuals who experience the pain of abandonment trauma could better understand themselves, but also so that those who are in relationships with someone who struggles with abandonment trauma could also better understand the individual and better deal and help them cope with the triggers as they arise. If this is the first time you and I meet, my name is Sarai Nammur from SaraiNammur.com, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor and licensed psychotherapist in the state of Florida. I make these videos to provide psychoeducation on the effects of childhood trauma, on healing and personal transformation to help people live more fulfilling lives. If you want to learn more about childhood trauma and its effects, hit the subscribe button and the bell so that you can be the first to know every time I upload one of these videos. Before we get started, I want to talk to you about some basic understandings you should have before we really dive into the meat of what is abandonment trauma and where does that come from. So number one, I want you to understand that you were not born like this. No one was born like this. You were not born with the intense fear of abandonment and the subsequent reactions that come from that. Number two, because you are human and you are an intelligent human being, you learn to become who you became as a result of something terrible that happened to you due to neglect, trauma, or abuse, or a combination of all of that. In other words, your initial reaction to what you went through was normal and it helped you survive. However, the reactions and the way you might be coping every time your abandonment trauma gets triggered is probably not functional, and it might be hurting you as an adult. It might be hurting you in your relationships with the people that are most important for you in your romantic relationships, or it could be a reason why you push away relationships or you abandon others. Number three, our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors become affected by abandonment trauma, and these are our bleeding points. So in other words, the way that you think, the way that you feel, and the things that you do because of what you're thinking and feeling is all affected when your abandonment trauma gets triggered. Number four, abandonment trauma can happen at any time in our lives, but I'm going to talk about the type that happens in childhood and how it affects our adult relationships when not healed appropriately. And number five is there's hope in healing, there's hope in transformation, and there's hope in you learning and gaining awareness into how you became who you became, and then you having a desire to become a better expression of yourself and heal. Tell me in the comments section below, do you know someone with abandonment issues? Maybe yourself? What is the most common experience that you've had with it? So what is the abandonment wound? An abandonment wound doesn't always come from a major catastrophic childhood event. It could also come from very insidious ways we were treated as children, from consistently being denied a voice as a child to abuse, including psychological and emotional abuse, to being left alone at home because our parents had to work all day and they just didn't have the time to be home. Often, it's a byproduct of the wounds that come from experiencing childhood abuse, such as sexual abuse, childhood abandonment or neglect, physical abuse, emotional and psychological abuse, or more commonly, a combination of two or more of these experiences. These examples of childhood complex trauma leave a child emotionally wounded, and as adults, if we don't make the intentional decisions to heal our inner child, that inner child will continue to act out to get its needs met through any means possible well into our adulthood. It will cause havoc in our adult relationships, and it will cause havoc in our lives, depending on how deep the wound is and the meaning that we've given to our wounds. The story may not be the same for everyone, but the symptoms and the long-lasting feeling of abandonment, isolation, and loneliness are common and easily bond those who experience an abandonment wound. Abandonment wounds are very serious and very common, and they're extremely painful psychological wounds that have very long-lasting effects, again, that pour into all of our adult relationships. I want to talk to you now about 12 examples of ways in which they could develop. Number 1, parents having to work long hours and therefore spending little time with the children. Number 2, often being dropped off at a grandmother's house or babysitter's house for hours at a time. Number 3, parental separation due to finances or political issues. And that's very common when we see the kids that are coming across the border by themselves, or parents that come across the border leaving their children behind. And it could even take 5-6 years for that parent to be stable enough to bring their child with them and to reunify with their child. Number 4, parental divorce. Parental divorce is a big source of this, especially when the parents don't have the maturity to put the child's needs first, or when it's a chaotic type of divorce where it's just impossible to put the child's needs first. And in these situations, it could even be where the child from one day to the next never sees one of their parents again. Number 5 is death or illness of a parent. Here's another way where this could occur, where it isn't through abuse. It happens where a parent all of a sudden dies due to an accident or to some sort of illness that is caught late, and the parent has very little time to live. That's another way where the child could acquire the abandonment wound. Number 6, parental incarceration, where the parent could be incarcerated for years at a time, and all of a sudden the child doesn't see one of the parents. Number 7, parental drug abuse. Parental drug abuse could come in many forms. It could be that the parent is using so often that they're not emotionally available. They might not even be physically available. At the end of the day, what results is that the child is being physically, spiritually, emotionally, maybe even educationally, in so many ways that child could be neglected. It could also be that the parent is maybe using something that makes them pass out for hours at a time, leaving the child needing to take care of them. And in that sense, the child is also being abandoned. That child is being abandoned and neglected in so many different ways and at so many different levels that it causes the child to also disconnect from their own needs, because at that point, the child's needs are not even relevant. Number 8, parental mental health problems such as depression, anxiety, anger. It doesn't even have to be severe. Different types of mental health issues that are chronic also affect the child, or if it's a combination of mental health with substance use, again, it affects the child again because the child isn't getting their needs met. They're not getting their emotional, psychological needs met. They might not be getting the food that they need. They might not be going to school. There's so many different ways that a child gets neglected when the parents have mental health issues. Number 9, growing up with an emotionally unavailable parent. That goes along with mental health and even substance use issues, where the parent is simply emotionally unavailable because they just don't have the skills to be emotionally available. Perhaps they were also abandoned. Perhaps they haven't dealt with their childhood traumas. Perhaps they haven't done their own healing, and so they're simply emotionally unavailable to the child. Number 10, growing up in a rigid home that focused more on compliance over nurturance. So very rigid homes might have everything in them, and they might have the nice house, a nice car, the child might be well provided for as far as what they eat, going to school and all of that. But when a parent is very rigid, when a parent is very critical, maybe condescending, maybe very hostile towards the child on a continuous basis, this causes the child to feel emotionally abandoned, not seen, not heard. The child has no voice. So again, it leads to, again, being emotionally abandoned. Number 11 is childhood sexual abuse. This is another way that a child is abandoned, where the child's needs aren't even considered. Their physical, emotional, psychological needs are not being considered. Therefore, that results in abandonment. The child feels very alone in that situation, especially if the child is keeping a secret for many, many years, and they feel so alone with this secret. They feel different from everyone else. They're disconnected. And this is my final one, but it isn't the end of it. But number 12 is childhood emotional and psychological abuse. Sometimes it could go along with mental health problems, the rigid parenting and that sort of thing, where the child is being criticized. It's a very hostile environment. The parent has issues with raging. The parent becomes irate and can't control their own emotions, and the child ends up becoming emotionally and psychologically abused, and that also leads to the abandonment wound. An abandonment wound can leave us feeling very insecure, make us become very hard on ourselves and others. It could cause us to desperately seek out approval and validation from others. There's so many different ways that abandonment wounds show up, but it usually shows up in our interactions with the most significant people in our lives. The abandonment wound can cause us to be triggered by what people say, by what people do, by what we think they should say and what we think they should do, which basically comes from our inner child's needs that haven't been met. It could cause us to overreact, and it could cause us to become chronic people pleasers and neglect our own needs by not setting healthy boundaries. These are all valid trauma responses to a real experience, to a real life experience of physical or emotional abandonment experiences as children. And usually, again, it's not usually one experience that leaves an abandonment wound. It's usually multiple experiences layering one on top of the others. In all the examples that I gave from 1 to 12, it could be a combination of all of those happening over the child's childhood, over the lifetime of their childhood. And also, by the way, if you have more to add, if you came up with your own different exposures that could cause an abandonment wound, please go ahead and put them in the comments below so that I could add them to my list and you could share them with anyone that's watching this video or who's reading the comments. It's important to understand that an abandonment wound is the psychological aftermath a child endures because of these experiences. It is the meaning given to these experiences that then become weaved into our psyche and into our identity. The meaning then becomes our core beliefs about ourselves, about the world, and how we fit into the world. So it is very, very severe, and it does have profound effects in how we show up in the world and who we believe ourselves to be. Some core beliefs a child may acquire are: no one loves me, no one will ever love me, I'm not good enough, I will only be loved when I agree with others, I have to please others, my needs don't matter, the world is not safe, I'm just such a bother to everyone, there's something wrong with me, what I think, feel, and want don't matter, I only matter when I'm doing for others. There are all these beliefs that children acquire, and they don't just disappear. From childhood, we acquire these beliefs, and then we become adults holding these beliefs. And then we enter relationships and act out our beliefs in the things we say, in the way we feel, in the ways that we're getting triggered, in the ways we interact, in the demands or the wants that we have in our relationships. We end up showing up as that wounded child as an adult in adult relationships. So it's really important to understand this. When we don't heal from childhood trauma, it leaves us continuing to react and continuing to live in those old emotions, old thinking patterns, and old behaviors that were once adaptive and appropriate to our childhood circumstances and our childhood experiences. And they may have even helped us survive something very real that happened to us. However, we're no longer living there. We're no longer living in that time period. Even if we are living there in our minds, in reality, we're not living there. Yet, if we don't heal this abandonment wound, we will continue to react and we will continue to act as though we're still that wounded child. Know that you don't have to be a prisoner to your painful memories or to the person you had to become to survive. Know that you're not crazy, even if you feel crazy. You simply acquired ways of being in response to something crazy that happened to you. But know that there's growth, there's transformation, and an amazing life on the other side of healing. We are not responsible for what happened to us, but we are responsible for our healing and our own life. Becoming intentional about your healing journey could change everything for you, and it is the path for you to become the best expression of yourself. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned a lot. For those of you that stuck around to the end, I have a guide that I created on the transformational growth process and what it takes for you to transform your life and start your healing journey. And I want to end this video letting you know that I believe in you, I am a reflection of you, and healing and transformation is absolutely possible for you.